So you were saying something, Mollie, and then we can move into you guys have been social distancing as a staff for a while now?
Yeah, just thinking of the balance of sort of relative risk and need, and it feels like we're able to do what we need to do, working together virtually. So it doesn't feel like worth the added risk of trying to be together.
Same thing for our team. We're putting together a new podcast of conversations, but we had to do it all remotely. So it's like calling in, microphones, Zooming. So yeah, we're trying to figure it out as best we can.
Wow.
So I want to welcome all of the individuals who've joined us recently. We want to welcome you to this webinar coming out of K Spiritual Life Center, Comfort Without a Hug. K Spiritual Life Center sits at the heart of American University, a place for meaning, purpose, and community. And in the midst of our national and global tragedies and challenges, the communities of the K Spiritual Life Center have gathered a diverse communities of belief together for conversations, reflection, and shared prayer. And you heard the beginnings and some of the sort of continued conversation that we have that isn't necessarily recorded or broadcast. The current circumstances are no different. As the university made decisions with regard to in-person instruction in response to COVID-19 outbreak, our various communities of belief have had to pivot to different modes of gathering and being together. And I've been really impressed with the creative and thoughtful considerations of the various religious and spiritual leaders related to American University and their commitment to our community. K Spiritual Life Center, even in a virtual way, sits now, again, at the heart of the conversations about finding meaning and community as we live into our current circumstances. Before we begin, I'd like to name our reality. Given our current stay-at-home orders, I'm hosting this conversation from my home, and I'm joined by 3 others who are also at various different places that feel like home or our home. Some of us have pets that may make an appearance in this webinar. Some of us have children who may show up needing various different things, and it could be as simple as getting me on Zoom or solving my various video game challenges. I personally have 4 little ones in a state of home education with my partner, who is doing her best to give us this time of quiet, but we may still be visited by a little one who needs something. Today, I'm joined by 3 significant thinkers related to K Spiritual Life Center as we consider the second of a series of topics related to our current circumstances and the way that our communities are responding to them. Reverend Blane Young became the director of American University Chi Alpha in 2014, completed an internship with Chi Alpha in 2011 and 12, and is a credentialed minister with the Assemblies of God. His main roles include preaching, teaching, mentoring, and counseling students, all while overseeing the ministry. It's just a small, position, right? Before coming to Washington, D.C., he worked on staff at Family Life Church in Brunswick, Georgia. He graduated in 2009 from the University of Alabama, where he was a National Hispanic Scholar and received a BA in Religious Studies and minored in Computer Science, Technology, and Applications. Grace Hegarty is the Catholic campus minister here at AU. Fell in love with campus ministry during her undergraduate career at the University of Maryland, where she was very involved at the Catholic Student Center. She attained a Bachelor of Arts with a double major in English language and literature and political science. She has a history of working with federal government and other churches and ministries with the Catholic Archdiocese of Washington, which led her to work with us now at American University. Welcome, Grace. And Mollie Feldman joined AU's Hillel in July of 2017 as an assistant director and senior Jewish educator. She received 2 master's degrees from the Hornstein Jewish Professional Leadership Program at Brandeis University. She previously served as the youth director at a synagogue in Minneapolis and as an educator at Brandeis Collegiate Institute, an innovative 4-week residential program for Jewish young adults. Mollie completed the Experiential Jewish Educator program at the Pardis Institute in Jerusalem and received a certificate in Experiential Jewish Education from Hebrew Union College. We were supposed to be joined today by the Venerable Brahmachari Brajvihari Sharan, who is the Hindu consultant for the K Spiritual Life Center. But he was called away just earlier today to advise on the funeral rites during the current stay-at-home orders. And as an expert in Hindu spiritual rites and funeral rites, he had this responsibility. We hold Brahmachari and the family for whom he's caring right now in our hearts and prayers. And for those of you who don't know, I'm the Reverend Bryant Oskvig. I'm the interim university chaplain at K Spiritual Life Center for American University, a United Methodist minister who's been in campus ministry since 2006. And we welcome all of you who are joining us today, and we hope that you find meaning through our conversation and that you find some value in it. So as we begin this conversation today, our previous conversation is how we find community. Our current conversation is really on how our communities express compassion amongst themselves as well as in the broader community. And I will tell you that this topic came up for me as I was saying goodbye to a close friend of mine, and we were doing it at distance. And this is an individual whom I would normally hug, and realizing that that was not sort of something that we would be doing. And reflecting on what we do when we see someone who's hurt emotionally or otherwise, and the inability, being at distance, to give those sorts of hugs or express that sort of compassion that we normally do. So Mollie, starting with you, how does compassion, outreach, and care figure into the religious and spiritual understandings of the Jewish community, and why is that?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm thinking of a topic of conversation that comes up often with students or staff, which is a question of like, what is the value add of investing and committing and being connected with Jewish community? And to a certain extent, if the value is like, you know, a nice group of friends or maybe a mentor, there's a question that could emerge of like, why is this different than being part of a Greek life organization or some other sort of club? Like what is the value add? And the way that both for myself and often with my students that I think about that question is that the value added of living in deep relationship with Jewish life and Jewish community is that there is a sort of holistic approach to caring for a person as a full individual in all of the ups and downs of their life. And what that means is, in particular moments of celebration or sorrow, that there are structures and frameworks and methods of support and caring that are able to show up for people and uplift them in those moments of celebration and sit in the darkness with them during moments of sorrow. And all of those ways of celebration and sort of being in suffering together are, in a traditional framework, things that require real physical presence and proximity with other people. So that could be, attendance at joyous life cycle events, bringing meals in celebration, sharing meals as part of holidays and festivals and Shabbat. It could be visiting people who are in mourning, sitting with them during Shiva, the 7-day mourning period after death. And that I think this model as a whole within Jewish practice and Jewish life sort of sends a message to me of like, we can't do it alone. And part of the challenge right now is that we are trying to navigate how to still show up in really deep and meaningful ways when we do need to be alone to a certain extent. So that's sort of my first thought or picture of thinking about both the ways that proximity functions through care, but also some of the challenges for the moment that we're in right now.
Grace or Blane?
Yeah, I think for us, it highlights a tension that's existing within our own community and theological stream, even pre-pandemic. As a Protestant and Pentecostal, to kind of drill down on terms, I think we're at this crossroads of, is our faith about getting to heaven, or is our faith about bringing heaven here? And for us, I think that's where compassion enters the conversation. And I think all of us, well, a lot of people in my stream, I'll say it this way, maybe would say verbally, oh, it's about bringing heaven here. But then we have to ask ourselves the difficult questions, and we're doing this even in the pandemic, is what is our schedule and our budget and our finances? What are they really built towards? Is it built towards kind of getting somewhere or bringing something? And so I think for us, especially during Lent, we're just re-engaging with the person of Jesus, and he brought things to people, and he brought pieces of what people imagined heaven to be: fullness, health, prosperity, into an earthly moment. And so we're trying to make sure we're aligned in that same way, instead of just creating great content, or like Mollie said, a great kind of mentorship experience. how do we offer something that's both a need and difficult to find elsewhere?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say ours is sort of the same for the Catholic community at AU. I would say it's kind of actually sort of between sort of what Mollie is saying and what Blane is saying as well. Like people feeling cared for is so crucial to our faith, but also what's so crucial to our faith is this like body soul interaction. We're body, mind, soul. And so often as Catholics, like you go to a mass and it feels like a little bit of a workout, stand, sit, kneel, stand, sit, kneel. You're doing all these like hand movements.
I'm just glad you named what I didn't feel comfortable enough to say in a webinar. So thank you for that.
No, I will gladly admit it. It's just, I love it because, we have the incense, we have the smells, we have the bells, we have the sounds, we have the songs, we got all this. And it's this like bodily, physical, tangible experience. And so to not be able to have that, because we are body and soul, and Christ did take on a human form, and he did come and he touched people. He touched the lepers. Physical touch was like such a big thing. They talk about him spitting in the mud and then smearing the mud in the blind man's eyes. He had to touch him to do that. And so for us, like this, like bodily element is so important to compassion, outreach, and care, because, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately too, like what we do is so powerful. Like the physical touch that we have is really powerful to either like kill or destroy or abuse, or to really take care of. And so, I've just been thinking about that a lot, and how like Mother Teresa always said, like one of the greatest poverties is feeling unloved or being abandoned. And so like Christ on the cross, and I'm thinking about this especially this week, because for us this week is Holy Week. So we celebrate like Christ's death, and maybe not celebrate is the right word, but venerate Christ's death and then celebrate his resurrection. And these were like really bodily, like his body he was nailed to the cross and his body raised from the dead. And so like, but what was the worst pain was this abandonment that he experienced. And so we're sort of, working on like, while not being present to people, not being physically present to people, like we're working on like, how can we incorporate that like physicality into this Holy Week for our students, and into this experience for our students. And so, yeah, that's one of the things I've been thinking about, just because, yeah, it's so important.
I sort of was personally reflecting on this. I'm from, grew up in Texas and from the Midwest, and sort of one of the sort of key expressions of compassion amongst people is sharing of food. You drop off a casserole. I'll never forget how many Jello molds we got when my grandfather died that were dropped off at the house as sort of an expression of a local community's compassion for our family. And at first that was incredible for me, because I loved the way as a child I was surprised how Jello, which was always a dessert, became a salad. But that's a Midwestern thing. I don't know how that, it's got fruit in it. It counts, I guess. I don't know. But thinking about our local communities, and I'm going to ask you guys sort of specifically, how have your local sort of student communities expressed compassion amongst one another sort of prior to this? I mean, like, was that, food sharing or gathering as communities or praying with one another? I mean, even thinking in the interfaith context, sort of one of the interesting conversations I had in interfaith is the Christian communities have this habit of, when we want to express unity, we all hold hands. And yet, in other faith communities, the holding of hands is not something that is sort of an allowable or something that should be done. It becomes sort of an insulting practice. And so it's sort of thinking about those things. How have your local student communities expressed compassion to one another in the past? Whoever.
Revo, it's funny you say that, because my students hate to hold each other's hands. Like they don't do it, they hate it. And so what our students usually do, a lot of them, it was just kind of like hanging out with each other. Like they would always be sitting on the Catholic couches, they'd be hanging out with each other. I don't know. A lot of the times they don't tell me like some of the things that they do, because maybe it's like a Snapchat chain that I would disapprove of. I have no idea. But what I know that they're doing now is, I know that a lot of them are doing like Zoom calls with each other, and they're trying to be really intentional about reaching out to one another, to the point where like we've organized like some of our staff members to do one-on-one calls to all of the students that we have phone numbers for, and we've brought in some of the older students in order to help us to do that. And they've been really good about reaching out to like those who might be in need, and really trying to like, our older students have been really good about like making sure that everyone is staying connected to the community. But also that like they're maintaining their friendships as well. So one of my students just made like an AU Catholic bingo, and supposedly this is going around social media. Like supposedly like bingos are a thing on social media now, but I have no clue. And like you're supposed to like fill it out and then like repost it. And I don't know if there's a winner or not, but they're doing that too. And it's really cute because like some of them are like nostalgic. Like one of them is like, said you would go to the AU Catholic couches to study and didn't end up studying. So it's like, or like another one is like, ended up cleaning up the dishes after an AU Catholic event in K. So they're cute things like that they're doing to try to like keep that like familial aspect of the community alive.
In one word for Chi Alpha, it's coffee. I mean, coffee in person. I mean, the DAB is known as like the second Chi Alpha office some days. I have a personal theological belief that if I have 5 one-on-ones at the DAB in one day, I do need to get a different beverage for each. And so, yeah, I mean, coffee. I mean, students that don't drink coffee in our community feel like second-rate Christians, as they should, as they should.
Controversial. No, I agree with that. I think that we spend, both staff and student interns, we spend a lot of time doing one-on-one conversations and outreach. And one of the big ways that care is expressed is through the intentionality of saying like, hey, I want to get to know you better and let's have a conversation, or you're somebody that I'm already in relationship with and I know, and let's reconnect and catch up, and like, how are you doing? But no, how are you really doing right now? And I think that there's such an emphasis in our community and value placed on that sort of one-on-one connection. And part of what we've been navigating both as staff and also as students is how do we hold on to that, but change what it looks like when we're doing it in a virtual way, when first of all, we're not going to be across the table from each other at a coffee shop. And also something that we're noticing and trying to sort of react to and respect is that different students have different levels of comfort and interest and bandwidth right now for virtual gatherings. So it's not necessarily as simple as saying like, oh, we used to do all these coffee dates, let's just ask people to do all of that on Zoom. Because that's not necessarily what people want or are looking for in every case, and it's not necessarily what's helpful in every case either. So we're trying to both expand like what is our framework for what are the different ways we can connect with people, and then navigate in a sensitive way like where is this particular person actually at, what do they need and want as an expression of care at this particular moment.
Mollie, take us to the intersection of those concerns and virtual karaoke night.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so we're doing a virtual karaoke night featured on the AU Hillel Instagram.
Mollie, that's awesome.
Please tell me it will be recorded, and then the karaoke, please tell me you record that video conference and then share it.
That is an excellent idea. I'll float it by the students. We'll see what they say. But basically our model on campus that we're also trying to do virtually is that we have there's some really like educational content-based programs that staff is in charge of because of our skill set and background, but mostly everything else we do, we want to be student run, student directed based on student interest, and we do think that there's a lot of value to create the sort of like social gathering spaces. So our interns who are still trying to create these opportunities, there's a couple of them who are involved with a cappella on campus and like are really missing having the opportunity to connect with friends through music and song, even outside of like any sort of prayer or religious context, but just to like have fun singing and doing it in that sort of very low key, low barrier way. So they had the idea to do a virtual karaoke night that would be just like an opportunity for people to come, hang out, schmooze in a very in a very mostly like unstructured sort of environment. So that's what we're doing.
Will you be singing and will you be present at the event?
Ooh, this is what I want to know.
So I will be present at least at the beginning, if only to help navigate the new security features on Zoom that utilize the waiting room. But I'm not sure how long I'll stay.
But if you did sing a song, I mean, what song would you pick?
Probably You and I by Lady Gaga.
Okay, yeah, I got
Ooh,
respect for
good
that.
choice.
Thanks for being open. Thanks for sharing.
Nice, Molly. I want to see a video recording of this.
I will donate $5 to Hillel if I see a video of you singing that song.
I
Well,
echo that. I will do that as well.
We really need
That's
it right now.
$10
So
of fundraising that Jason doesn't have to worry about, Molly.
that's actually a compelling.
One of the interesting articles, I'm bringing this down because I really like the conversation on karaoke. The last thing anyone would want to see is me singing karaoke. So I would end up costing Hillel money rather than sort of making the money. But one of the things that I read actually just this morning was the idea of the question, changing the question from how are you doing, which sounds like we're doing activities, to how are you? And talking about sort of the challenges of the current moment and doing as one of the sort of significant things, right? We're learning how to do whatever it is differently. It reminds me a little bit of sort of the conversation on that I've frequently had with students with, when I ask how are you, I get, I'm busy. And then it becomes a litany of proving how busy you are as sort of a statement of your meaningfulness in life, and how that, how over-programmed you are isn't a statement on sort of your capacity or your competency, but just sort of a real sort of a misunderstanding of what we should be, how you should prioritize, or what you should be thinking life is about. And I just sort of, as the conversation continued, this conversation, I really began sort of thinking about, like, how do we ask people how are they, sort of at this distance thing, moving away from the doing, and sort of a different reflection. And that moves me to sort of this next question, which is, now the greatest act of compassion we can show towards each other is actually not being with each other. And where have you seen the biggest resistance or challenges, or disappointments in community on that? So, I named not being able to hug a friend goodbye when I know that we're not going to see each other again for a while. Where have you seen other sort of moments of challenge in that? I know that, Mollie, you'd mentioned this, the last meeting, and Brahmachari is actually, who was supposed to be with us today, is navigating, there's an expectation of a certain number of people to pray together during a morning period, and they're not able to do that. And so looking at and considering new ways of gathering. Where have you seen sort of the biggest sort of challenges in that? Holding a hand when you're saying a prayer, and those sorts of things.
I think for better or for worse, from our tradition, we're seeing these, like you said so well, like there's a new way of caring, a new way of neighboring. And I think that's causing some theological shifts or questions to be asked in the circles that I'm in. I think, to oversimplify, I feel like in a Catholic Mass, the Eucharist plays a very important role. I think much of Protestant American Christianity is kind of the Sunday machine, as I would call it. It's let's gather together, but it's less of an interaction and more of a little bit of a consumption. And so I think that because we can't gather, and that has been primarily a marker of how involved is somebody, how much do they care, how do their behaviors mirror their beliefs, I think it's caused a lot of questions. But it's funny enough, for me, I think it's caused more questions for the people who are usually the Sunday morning communicators than the lay people in churches, because they're able to kind of grow into this idea of pastoring in their home, engaging their children with faith. It's kind of, for some it's new, others it's exciting. But I think it's the people like myself who have gotten up in front of 400, 500 people on a Sunday morning and proclaim the gospel. I think we're really having to grieve, but also reevaluate, was that as important as we made it? And is that the most important marker for theological engagement or Christian growth? And so I think even for us, before we think through the sacraments or baptism, like we talked about last week, or even funerals or weddings, which I'm starting to navigate with some of my students and alum in terms of weddings and plans, is wow, Sunday mornings really was that thing. And where did that come from? And what does it mean to put that aside? And then how will we pick it back up again?
Yeah, that really resonates for me, thinking also in the framework of regular times of community gathering, whether it be Friday night services or Friday night Shabbat dinner or Shabbat morning services, which are examples that fall within sort of traditional ritual frameworks, although certainly there's other sort of non-ritual based examples that are central places where our students or community might have found that sense of connection. And especially tonight, the first Passover Seder is tonight for the Jewish community. And I imagine that this is very top of mind for many Jewish families and individuals around the country and the world right now, where this really central ritual moment in our year, and for many families, sort of the most active moment of sort of family gathering and celebration and observance is going to look extremely different this year. And people will be, some people will be Zooming Seders with different family or friends. Others will be, celebrating just with those who are in their households, and others will be alone. And I think that there's a big question emerging of like, what does it look like to change this central ritual that for many who are adults, there's decades and decades of memories of like, this is what the family Seder looks like. These are our traditions. These are our family customs, to sort of like wipe that out and say like, it's going to be different this year. And it has generated a really interesting conversation within the Jewish community around self-care and mental health in particular, of sort of saying if like the most you can muster is like making yourself a matzah pizza and like doing Kiddush, like that's okay. And, when we have these images of our decades of family or community Seders, they're holiday meals. It's like a big feast. It's festive. There can, I think, be a lot of pressure to like recreate that on an individual scale, which I think is both extraordinarily difficult at any point of time, and especially with all of the stress and anxieties of the world right now. So there has been an effort to also help people sort of frame and set expectations in a way that's realistic and reasonable for what people might be needing right now.
It was Mollie, you brought up sort of where we are into the holiday season. For the Christian community, we're moving into, it is Holy Week. We move into the Easter celebrations on Sunday, and rethinking, Blane, to your earlier comment, how do we do the Easter celebrations when you can't go and gather in the spaces of worship that you normally do, where you're not surrounded by the Easter lilies? Now, I have friends who are allergic to Easter lilies, and they're not like missing that part of the experience. And I can't tell you how many vestments, Grace, I have that have pollen stains on them from the number of years I've had to pick up Easter lilies after the fact. But
I believe it.
we're moving into that season where, to your point, Mollie, we're having to rethink, well, how do we do this? If your family tradition, as mine was, was to go to a sunrise service somewhere together and then follow it with a large brunch, well, how are we doing that moment of gathering? How are we rethinking sort of those experiences? And Blane, whole religious, not locally with the family, but sort of more, sort of broadly, how does a religious congregation rethink, we as a congregation, we as a community of faith have gathered in this particular way. Grace, where have you seen the sort of the biggest disconnects and challenges in this moment of compassion that makes us, where compassion is being distant from one another?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of it. Like, I think this whole situation is challenging, and I mean, I find that, well, so yeah, it's challenging. With that said, I will say I've seen with a lot of our students, kind of going back to your previous question that you had said about sort of like being versus doing. And I've seen with a lot of our students, the ones who have found like a lot more peace being at home and everything are ones who have really just like drove into the skid almost. Like they're ones who like went home and we're like, okay, like this is my life now. I'm just gonna have peace in this. I'm gonna go to my classes, have my schedule. I'm gonna pray with my parents. I'm gonna eat with my parents. I'm gonna just, yeah, enjoy it, soak up this time with my parents. They're the ones who have actually found the most peace because they found the most acceptance in sort of what's going on and where God has placed them for this particular moment. And it's actually been really beautiful to see that and to see like the fruit that's come from that. And of course, that's still challenging. You know, those are the only people that you're around, especially in a family where maybe the kid is the only child. That's 3 people, and that's a lot of time together. And so I think that like, the challenge is kind of like for those cases, I would say like that might be sort of like the exception, but definitely the ones who have found the most peace. But I would say for some, the challenge is one, getting them to accept where they are and what's going on. And then 2 is also really encouraging the students to be disciplined and to have a schedule that's really going to help them. I in like the New Jersey Times or whatever it is, there's this cloistered nun who wrote an article that's called "I've been social distancing for 29 years and here's how you can do it better." And in it, she gives all this great advice about like, yeah, I wake up, I have a nap time, I have a bedtime, and I really stick to it. And I have a time where I do my chores, a time where I study, a time where I pray, and a time where I interact with the other sisters. And she says like having those like times is just helped her the most. And I found that in my own life when I do stick to my schedule, because that's a challenge for me. But when I do, I have so much more peace. I have so much more energy. And so kind of encouraging the students to do that as well. I found that that's been a real challenge because I'm sure for a lot of them, it feels like a lazy Saturday afternoon most days now. And so really sort of getting them to see that has been huge. And then I'll let Mollie and Blane answer before talking about, Easter and Passover, just because, yeah, I think it's hard for everyone that we can't all be together. I think it's really hard for a lot of our community that they can't receive the Eucharist. And yeah, I think it's just like, it is what it is. But, one of my coworkers actually sent me this meme earlier today, and I'll read it like later, but it's something like, yeah, we're doing Easter the real biblical way, 3 people by themselves in front of a tomb. So it was sort of this like joke that like, oh, we're going biblical this year for Easter. So I think Mollie had alluded to something like that last time too with Passover, just sort of like, they were, or maybe Blane did, but like everyone was told to hunker down. So in a way like that can open up to, yeah, I think it can open us up to really experiencing it in a new way.
I think Mollie was the one who named some of the biblical tradition that, sort of was informative to the Jewish community. I'm going to transition us over to sort of, you already have all mentioned sort of new ways of expressing compassion, inside of your communities. I sort of want to expand on that. So if you have other expressions you want to name, or sort of one of the most poignant or most touching gestures you've experienced. I have a friend who knows that I enjoy all things dairy, ice cream and cheese, and they sent me some of my favorite cheese as a surprise. Just one day there was this box out front, and I just was like blown away. I will admit that sort of I got a little bit teary-eyed. I think that there was a lot of dust swirling around or something at the moment, but just sort of that personal connection. It was after a particular rough day. Grace, the parents with 1 child and like being together a lot, I will tell you as a parent with 4 kids, like we're together a lot. And after sort of a difficult day of managing the 4 little ones, it was just sort of a kind gesture to have someone basically say, I see you, and I want you to know that I care for you. Where have you seen those gestures inside your community, or even personal, sort of what have been those most poignant gestures of care and compassion that you've seen?
Yeah, I think for us, we kind of are continuing kind of along this same trajectory of how does our community engage in service projects? How do we kind of focus outwardly, but not in a way that just helps us feel better about ourselves, but in a way that's truly helpful? And so one of the things we're doing over Easter weekend is we have this kind of giving campaign where we're encouraging students to give financially into this campaign called Sharing Freedom. And with that, with every dollar given, we'll be able to purchase $75 of medical debt for under-resourced families in Puerto Rico. And so for us, we're trying to make sure like that we're encouraging individual acts of compassion person to person, but we do have an organization. So like, are we going to leverage that to benefit someone else? And so I think that it's been really interesting that students are hungry for more and more opportunities to kind of bless outwardly. And for us, the pandemic, it's almost taken off the table the things that we would typically like to do that probably help us more than whoever we're trying to help. And so it's almost made us a little bit more honest in our compassion. And that's both refreshing and difficult to try to look back and think, oh, the things we had programming before, that really helped us, but we said it helped others. That's not good. So how does this lens help us to kind of even reflect on what areas of our own ministry styles might be problematic? Because I feel like the pandemic provides brutal clarity. And so I think honestly, we're realizing there's some areas where we haven't excelled in as a community.
Yeah, I'm thinking especially of the ways that I've seen people want to celebrate others, particularly in the spaces where there may have been sort of more normative celebrations happening that because of the state of the world right now won't be happening. So, you know, one example of that is seeing the ways that so many students who are not seniors have reached out and been like, how can we celebrate the seniors? And, you know, what can we do for them? How can we, you know, write notes and create gathering spaces and celebrate them even when this close to their semester and their time as an AU student is going to look very different than what they thought, probably in a very disappointing way. And I think that the recognition and effort and energy behind wanting to recognize that, but to still say like, there is a lot to be celebrated still, and we want to be joyous in that, and we want to be joyous with you. I think that has felt really uplifting and beautiful and generous to me. And I'm also thinking of what feel like some sort of similar examples from my personal life of, you know, friends who were going to have their wedding 2 weekends ago and had to cancel at the last minute, and on, you know, the day and the time that it was going to happen, all of the guests gathering on Zoom, like dressed in their finery, like, you know, sort of like trying to create to whatever extent could be possible, the sense of like of joy and celebration and happiness that would have hopefully have happened in a different way. But I think that there's still so much effort happening right now to create the happy moments, even in the midst of what feels like a sad and scary world. So that's feeling uplifting to me.
Mollie, do you sense in your community something that I sense in mine is people want to celebrate, but then they feel a little bit guilty celebrating when they see kind of the level of suffering primarily outside their community or outside their socioeconomic status? Do you find that, and how do you help people navigate that? I could use some tips.
Yeah, I mean, I think the primary conversation that I've had with students on that sort of topic is students expressing a sense of like emotional fatigue. I think this might have come up last week also, just like feeling totally emotionally fatigued of like thinking and talking about COVID-19 all of the time. And but then when they're in a conversation, it feels like so impossible to not have it become the focal point. And I think that I totally relate to that. I feel like I'm always navigating it. It's like the last thing I want to do is talk about this thing again, and then somehow that's the only thing I'm talking about. But I think that when I've been in those conversations with students, or when we've been trying to create space for the celebration, what's felt important is like a recognition of the moment. I think it's one thing to like pretend like it's not happening, and I think that feels disingenuous and strained, but I think that I've been trying to recognize it and say like, and like there's still an amazing accomplishment in graduating, and there's so much to be celebrated, and I want for you and I want for our community that we're able to be joyous in this thing that like we should be joyous for. And I think it's a hard thing to hold both of those, and I certainly don't feel like I have a perfect balance. Hi. But yeah, that's sort of what I've been thinking.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Sorry about that. Casey is definitely, like you said, Blane, a second-rate Christian because she hates coffee. So
Yeah. And clearly an extrovert. She saw a go-to meeting open and she needed to be in it.
no, yes, exactly. Exactly. If you can't tell, my colleagues and I are all quarantining together. So we haven't seen anyone else but each other because we were on a mission trip in New York when everything came out and when campus closed and all this. So we just stuck together, and that's been going on. I haven't, kind of to this point, I haven't really seen, I mean, I've seen a lot of like really sweet, like kind ways people have been caring for others. You know, I've seen like a lot of handwritten cards lately, and I find that really sweet. So like my bosses wrote all of us like a handwritten note for Easter, and that was really kind. Or my really good friend, she pulled out the landline from her house because she only had a cell phone. They had like disconnected their home phone, but the kids don't have cell phones. So she pulled out the landline, she puts it in the center of the living room, and all the kids started calling like their relatives. And it was like this super fun event where like they could overhear all the conversations and like hear how it was going. And the grandma had said, oh, like send me a video. One of the kids like learned how to ride his bike, and the grandma said, oh, send me a video. And the kid said, no, grandma, I want you to see it in person because I want to see your reaction. And so the grandma actually came to the house and just was like at the end of the driveway so that she got to see her grandson ride his bike. Of course, you know, they were social distancing, but you know, she wanted to see it so bad, and he got to see her reaction. So I thought that was so sweet, like that care of like, you know, even grandparents, they still want to see their kids riding their bike. I've
Grace,
seen, you know.
Grace, you
Go
said
ahead.
you're kind of experiencing all this with your team.
Yeah.
Blink twice if you feel like you're kidnapped, and we will help. Just blink twice at any point during this conversation. Blink once if you're sending Hillel and Chi Alpha $1,000. Blink once if you're sending us resources for Welcome Week.
Hilarious.
Blane, I want to come back to something that you said in a second, but I want to start before we get there, which is naming, and this was lifted up actually in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, that, you know, whereas coming to higher education for a lot of people became an opportunity of some greater equalization in socioeconomic status. Now, like the differences of socioeconomic status on access to internet speeds, even the environments from which you're Zooming and what's going on behind you are becoming so blatantly apparent that sort of, for as much as socioeconomic status was clearly and meaningfully and really experienced in college, there was also a little bit of, you know, we're going through this experience together, we're all in the same sort of spaces, and now like those differences are even becoming more pronounced. And, you know, one of the luxuries we enjoy is being able to do this. We all have access to technology. We all have spaces in which we're able to do this relatively quiet, you know, for as much as, you know, I heard some noise downstairs a second ago, and I'm waiting for someone to come barging in here and telling me what one of the other ones did to another one and how I need to be involved or not involved. You know, there's a certain luxury to that, and I think that invites a lot of reflection from all of our communities on how we sort of live into that in the way that we look at new or sort of broader expressions of compassion, knowing that that is the circumstance. And I'm going to come back around to that as opportunities for individuals who are a part of this to be involved in broader ways. But what I want to make sure we get time for is, what do you think we're going to carry with us out of this? And what do you think what do you think is we may leave behind? If that makes sense, what are the new experiences? Blane, you've named frequently, and I think that anytime that we experience challenging circumstances, it's an invitation to really reflect on what we're about and what we want to be about and reevaluate our priorities, right? And that's what you've named for yourself and Chi Alpha, is like, what are these activities? What were we hoping to achieve, and did it really achieve that? And I certainly think for a lot of communities, that's going to be what they carry forward, right? We got to be really clear in this moment about what we want it to be about, and so we're going to allow that to sort of define us as we move forward. Are there other things that you all think that we will carry with us out of these experiences and circumstances? And then I want to talk a little bit about sort of the compassion we can share with the broader community, the broader society. Mollie, Grace, or Blane?
I think this is a tough question because I don't want to assume something for the greater society. I don't know what everyone's different experiences are truly like right now. I can only, I'm only in my own shoes, but I think what we might carry with us, like as a society, like, and as a community for us, is sort of this like reminder of what it means to long for something. I think like, we're so used to receiving things instantaneously and seeing people right when we want to see them, or not seeing people when we don't want to see them, so but I think like this reminder to long for another person is something that we haven't had in a while as like a society. We haven't had it since the start of texting, basically, or smartphones. And so I'm not trying to like hate on modern technology. I have a smartphone. So I'm just saying like I miss people now, which I haven't missed people in a while. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people miss people, but I mean, like, my parents live an hour away, and I'm used to seeing them, at least twice a month at the least, and I haven't seen them in a month. And so sort of this reminder to miss someone and what that feels like, and how that can increase your love for them. And then I think something that we won't be taking with us, I mean, this is just my own personal theory, but I found that, even in the midst of this, I've been the grocery store shopper for the house because I have a car and I can drive to Aldi and get good discounts. So, and that's a plug for Aldi. I think everyone should shop there. The smaller grocery stores are actually way better stocked right now than Giant are the big ones. Okay, anyway, but I think what we won't be taking is sort of this like meeting new people in public. I've noticed that like when I've been walking or when I've been at the grocery store, like, yeah, there's a couple times where random people have been like, oh, hey, how's it going? But a lot of people, like, even with the masks and stuff, like, we're not like looking at each other anymore because there's this fear of catching the virus, of course. But I think some of that might carry over. At least that's my own theory. I have no idea. I'm not trying to hate on anyone, but DC's already not the friendliest city in the world. And so I think that might carry over a little bit. People being like, oh, no, like, don't get too close. That might be that's my own theory.
My fear is that we'll rush back too deep into what was familiar without the proper reflection. I think my fear is that we'll be ultra focused and prioritized on, for instance, worship gatherings and numbers and who's in the room, without giving allowances for maybe people where that's harder. I do think, Reva, what you said is so true. I'm beginning to see and sense just how different my students' backgrounds are. And seeing them on a Thursday night, 20 of them in a Zoom call with very different backgrounds, different noise, different languages being spoken, I do think that illusion of equality or parity is lost. And I think that's made me think through, like, is our leadership pipeline designed for a particular student or type of student, and does that leave anybody out? And does our programming typically reflect just kind of the staff's intentions or the staff's college experience? So I think it's weird that, like, being in the pandemic is troubling, but going back after the pandemic also is some troubling things I still have to look at. And I think I'm afraid that those will get swept under. And so I'm trying to keep in my mind, like, maybe there's things I'm discovering that I shouldn't just shelve in this next semester of programming or calendar stuff.
Yeah, I'm really sitting with this question, and I think part of what I'm coming up against is like a tension between what I hope, like in the best case scenario of our world will be the outcome of, you know, what we'll carry with us from this experience. And then just a real deep questioning and maybe a little bit of skepticism or cynicism even of like, will that actually happen? And, you know, I do really want to lift up what you said, Revo, and thank you for bringing that up. And I think that the reality is that, you know, we live in a broken system in a lot of ways, and that this pandemic is highlighting and exacerbating the ways that we already lived in a broken world. And, you know, the reality that we live in a country, in a place where healthcare is not a human right, where there is deep and profound social and economic inequality, often connected to race and deep-seated and enduring racial prejudice. And I think that we're seeing that exacerbated and come to life in such a stark way that like it literally is making decisions about who will live and who will die. And I think that my hope of the best thing that could possibly come from this is that there might be, you know, major changes in recognition and policy and changes in healthcare and income inequality that would result from recognizing like just how grave and how high the stakes are for the sort of inequality and lack of access that exists around us. My fear is that that will not be the case, and that there will, you know, be a lot of suffering. And I think that the efforts to sort of lift that up are so important and significant right now.
So as we come to a conclusion on this conversation, one of the things I want to lift up is that we have both sort of a local focus inside of our religious communities, and then all of our religious communities and spiritual communities encourage sort of a broader consideration. And you all have been able to lift up this question on access and the difference that we have. I want to name opportunities that I know are going through American University. One of the sort of access points that people are identifying is the access of children, of school-age children in the DC area to having regular social interaction, in particular sort of reading support. And I know that American University is encouraging our students as they're able to really think about doing, you know, a program through our Center for Student Engagement around DC Reads or Thrive, in which there's an opportunity for our students to continue not just in this academic year, but actually to the conclusion of the DC academic year in June, in which students can actually sit with and get to engage local elementary school children in reading projects. And, you know, thinking about the compassion, watching my four who are young, and the need to have a social interaction beyond the family, and then sort of thinking of circumstances in which that access is even more limited than what we're experiencing here for a family. It's sort of an act of compassion that I hope that we carry forward, right? You know, is there a way that we can utilize technology to sort of create deeper relationships and sort of support? I'm also, you know, there's been another opportunity that's beginning to develop, which is the DC COVID Sitters, which is a program for students to actually go and provide childcare for healthcare workers who are responding to the current COVID crisis. And so opportunities for compassion that we hope to be listing certainly through the K Spiritual Life Center website and providing opportunities for our students to express that compassion sort of both inside their communities, but looking broader, how do we express it sort of to the broader DC area and begin to engage these difficult conversations, Mollie, to your point, on where we are as a nation and the real lack of access and what that looks like, and how do we sort of move then as a compassionate community forward. But that brings our conversation today to a conclusion. This conversation on Comfort Without a Hug. We hope that you'll join us for our next conversation, which is in 2 weeks on April 22nd at noon, as we'll be taking a week off in observance of Passover for our Jewish community. We will consider at that conversation in 2 weeks how we mourn as a community, which is titled Grieving at a Social Distance. We will explore both the funeral rites of our various religious communities, how we grieve together, and also how we individually make time and space for ourselves to grieve when we can't be present with our families with whom we would normally do it. We hope you'll join us for that conversation. You'll be able to find links to the upcoming events as well as a recording of this conversation on the American University Case Spiritual Life Center website. I thank my panelists, Grace and Blane and Mollie, for being a part of this conversation today. I'm extremely grateful for the thoughtfulness and talent that each of these companions brings to the endeavor of American University and Case Spiritual Life Center and our mission for meaning, purpose, and community. To our Jewish and Christian communities that are both moving into a holy season, we wish a blessed time of sacred observance as we find different ways to gather with our communities in this time. And I thank everyone who's on this conversation right now for joining us, and I pray that all who are here as panelists and participants remain healthy and well. Take care, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you.